100 years ago today, Austrian forces were bombarding Serbia. It was day 3 of what will become known as the Great War, the World War, and eventually World War I. Nearly 5 million Americans would serve. Yet a century later, Bill Plant tells us there is no national memorial in the nation's capital to honor their service.
It was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Instead, in the cruelest of ironies, it begat a century of bloodshed. But 100 years on, few remember the doughboys, Americans who died for their country.
There's very little mention of the World War I veterans.
James Costello's uncle, Private Vincent Costello, was the first District of Columbia employee killed in the war. Hundreds came to his funeral on the National Mall. The family believes Vincent's image was the model for this small statue titled The Supreme Sacrifice, tucked under the stairs in a District of Columbia office building. They wish the 116,000 Americans killed in action like Vincent Costello were better remembered. Tom Costello is Vincent's great-nephew.
It needs to be a beautiful place for people to understand the sacrifices made and the impacts on families like ours.
Immediately following the war, the nation did remember, placing thousands of plaques and monuments across the country. But decades later, many are in poor condition or overlooked. Historian Mark Levitch is on a mission to document each one.
It's such an important part of our physical and cultural landscape that's really what I want to bring out. Some of them are hiding in plain sight, and I just want to make people look and take notice.
Hiding in plain sight, like the modest monument to Washington, D.C. veterans of World War I, off on the side of the National Mall. It's kind of tucked away here, almost invisible.
It is tucked away. It's interesting. It's very close to the World War II memorial, very close to the Korean and the Vietnam memorials, but it's very much forgotten, and in part that's because it is a local memorial.
There is now a push for a national memorial to mark the sacrifice, the human disaster of what was known as the Great War, but which turned out to be only the introduction to a century of carnage.
Well, the UN Secretary General called today's Israeli attacks on Gaza outrageous. The White House said the U.S. is deeply concerned after bombs and shells struck a market and a school during what was supposed to be a ceasefire. In all, 129 Palestinians were killed today, mostly civilians, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The toll after 3 weeks of fighting now tops 1,300. 59 Israelis have been killed, all but 3 were soldiers. We have reports from both sides of the border. First, Barry Peterson in Gaza.
This is ceasefire Gaza style. Israelis pounded a market full of people who thought it was safe to be out during the 4-hour lull in the fighting. They paid with their lives for being wrong. The Israeli Defense Force said Hamas had broken the ceasefire by firing 26 rockets at Israel. Just as wrong were the refugees who thought being at a UN school meant protection. For them, death came before dawn. 3 shells fired, the UN believes, by the Israelis.
The third hit was here. It's important to understand that these rooms were crowded with refugees, as many as 40 people who had no warning and no protection.
The Israelis said they were shooting because they were taking fire from the area. And earlier this week, the UN said it had found rockets stored at a different vacant school. But UN spokesman Chris Gunness said they had given the Israelis GPS coordinates for this school 17 times. And then, even for someone who knows this war, today was too much, as he spoke to Al Jazeera. It is hard knowing what to feel in a city where funerals come almost hourly. One woman spoke of her anger. We should kill the Israeli women and children, she said, just like they are killing ours. But another spoke of her despair. It is enough, she cried out. Have mercy. And if there is one question at the end of this day, maybe it is how to explain war and violence and death to bewildered children trapped in its midst.
Don Daler is in Tel Aviv tonight. And Don, exactly what are the Israelis saying about the UN school?
James, the IDF says that there was firing towards Israeli soldiers coming from the direction of the school and that an investigation is still underway. Despite those heartbreaking images of these injured and dead children, though, polls show, and virtually every Israeli we've spoken to on the streets say that Prime Minister Netanyahu's popularity has never been higher, and there is very strong support for this war effort. Israelis put the responsibility for these civilian casualties solely on Hamas.
Don Daler in Tel Aviv, thank you. The long drought has taken a heavy toll on California, so about the last thing the state needed was a water main break. But it got one. 20 million gallons of water was lost yesterday when a 93-year-old main burst in Los Angeles. A college campus was flooded. Carter Evans is in L.A. tonight.
The geyser was just uphill from UCLA, turning the campus into a giant sink. The water rushed down into 6 structures, including a pair of underground garages. That's where Ryan Leonard parked his car.
So this area essentially looked like a waterfall.
Yeah, it was just a huge cascade of white water. A friend of mine was walking down and literally had to brace himself with the rail not to get swept out from under himself.
In all, 900 cars were stranded. Half remained flooded out. Some of the worst damage was in the basketball arena, where the water was nearly a foot deep. The school had just completed a $136 million renovation.
It looks like a tin can just ripped apart.
Mike Miller is a superintendent with the water department. The section of pipe that broke was installed in 1921. It was connected to another piece of pipe from 1956.
The city of LA uses roughly 550 million gallons of water every day.
Right.
And we're in a severe drought.
Right. It's tragic. Nobody likes to see that kind of water get lost. I could cry. I could just cry.
Crews can't begin the repair work while the water is still leaking, and 2 nearby shutoff valves are also leaking right now. They are considering closing one further upstream, but the concern is that could increase pressure in the system, causing more pipes to explode. James?
Carter Evans in Los Angeles. Thanks, Carter. The deadly Ebola outbreak has now touched Americans who put their lives on the line every day as Peace Corps workers. 2 of them in Liberia have been exposed to the disease, now blamed for 672 deaths there, and in Guinea and Sierra Leone. The Peace Corps said it is pulling more than 300 volunteers out of those countries temporarily. Dr. John LaPook has more on the worst Ebola outbreak on record.
The Peace Corps said the 2 volunteers had contact with a person who later died from Ebola. They have no symptoms and are currently isolated and under observation. 340 Peace Corps volunteers are being removed from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea out of an abundance of caution. The outbreak has infected at least 1,200 people and killed nearly 700. Dr. Stephen Monroe of the CDC.
Almost certainly those numbers will increase in the coming days, and they probably represent an underestimate of the true number of cases because there's incomplete reporting of cases in most of the districts.
The virus is spread through direct contact and has an incubation period of up to 21 days. So a person could become infected, feel perfectly fine, travel elsewhere, then become sick and contagious.
Theoretically, could the virus come over here to the United States?
Theoretically, the virus could arrive in the United States. And one of the things that we've done is to remind our healthcare providers in this country that if someone presents with symptoms that are compatible with Ebola virus, to ask them about recent travel history.
The CDC says even if the virus came to the United States, it would be unlikely to spread here. But in West Africa, mistrust of doctors and lack of healthcare infrastructure are hampering efforts.
The outbreak is definitely at the point where it's difficult to control. But it is true that this is going to be a long haul to bring this outbreak under control.
2 Americans in Liberia have Ebola, the doctor and the hygienist we told you about earlier this week. They are slightly improved but remain in serious condition. The organization they work with is evacuating all non-essential personnel from that country.
Well, it turns out not all of Lois Lerner's emails were lost when her computer crashed. Lerner is the former IRS official at the center of investigations over whether the agency targeted conservative groups for special scrutiny. Emails she sent on her BlackBerry surfaced today. Chip Reed now on what's in them.
Congressional Republicans have long argued that former IRS official Lois Lerner was hostile to conservatives. Now they believe they have a smoking gun. In 2012, Lerner, who was in England at the time, received an email from a friend that said, "You should hear the wacko wing of the GOP. The U.S. is through. The right-wing radio shows are scary to listen to." Lerner responded, "Great, maybe we are through if there are that many expletives." Her friend continued, "And I'm talking about the hosts of the shows. The callers are rabid." To which Lerner responded, "So we don't need to worry about alien terrorists. It's our own crazies that will take us down." Republican Dave Camp, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, has been a leader in the IRS investigation.
What do these emails tell you about Lois Lerner?
I think these emails show clearly a political bias against conservatives and conservative organizations that resulted in the violation of their constitutional rights to due process and equal protection.
In a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder today, Congressman Camp wrote, "It is my sincere hope that in light of this new, strong evidence, that you immediately begin aggressively investigating this matter or appoint a special counsel." The Justice Department says it is reviewing the letter. Lerner's lawyer did not respond to our requests for comment about her emails.
House Republicans took a parting shot at President Obama today. Before leaving town tomorrow for their August recess, they voted to authorize a lawsuit against him for allegedly overstepping his constitutional powers. Nancy Cordes now on the suing of the president.
The vote to sue, like most votes in Congress these days, was divided along party lines. Almost every Republican voted yes. Maryland's Andy Harris.
No president of either party should ever abuse their power. That's why this lawsuit is so necessary.
At issue is the president's executive action to postpone Obamacare's employer mandate, which will require large employers to cover insurance for their workers or pay a fine. Republicans said only Congress has the authority to postpone the law. North Carolina's Virginia Fox.
This is not about politics. If there were a Republican president doing the same thing, I would feel just as strongly. This is about the Constitution.
Democrats argued President Obama simply put the brakes on a regulation that wasn't ready. Hakeem Jeffries is from New York.
You are taking us on a joyride through the Article III court system. It is an effort that will crash and burn.
Republican frustration has been building for a while as President Obama signed executive orders to enact policies they oppose on energy, immigration, and welfare. Democrats contend it's his only option when Congress is hopelessly gridlocked. Alabama's Terry Sewell.
Enough is enough. With only 2 days left before our 5-week recess, we need to be doing the business of the American people, not the business of our political parties.
Individual lawmakers or small groups of them have tried to sue presidents before with little success. The courts have generally ruled that Congress already has the ability to check the president's power without bringing the third branch of government into it. James.
Nancy Cordes and Capitol Hill, thank you so much. John Dickerson in our Washington office is news political director. And John, before we begin, let's listen to what the president had to say about all of this earlier today in Kansas City.
But we could do so much more if Congress would just come on and help out a little bit. Stop just hating all the time. Come on.
So, John, simply put, what are both sides trying to accomplish here?
Well, both sides are trying to appeal to their political bases. Republicans in Congress say the president has just shoved them aside. We're not going to take it lying down, is how Congressman Paul Ryan put it today. That wins cheers in the conservative grassroots. The Democrats want to have a fight, too. It's helped them raise a lot of money recently. The risk is that in their tougher races, Democrats are trying to keep the conversation about local candidates and local issues. So a big national fight distracts from that.
So, John, all of this comes at a time when there is just so much turmoil going on around the world. Is anyone concerned about America presenting itself as a house divided?
Not really. I mean, in a midterm, a party's base voters are a larger slice of the electorate than in a presidential year. So the incentive is to talk about things that keep those voters engaged. And that means accentuating divisions. And if the president issues executive orders on immigration later this summer, as is expected, that is going to stir things up more. So if anyone, James, is concerned about the message this fighting sends globally, it'll be hard to hear them over all the shouting.
Understood. John Dickerson, thanks.
Authorities in North Carolina say an angry husband sprayed his father-in-law's house with bullets, killing 2 people after his wife ran to the home during an argument.
Andrew McEllis had driven by the residence on New Moon Drive twice and stopped and fired at least 30 rounds each time, striking and killing McEllis' father-in-law, Gary Simpson, age 61, and Simpson's grandson, 10-year-old Trey McCon Covington.
McAllis later exchanged gunfire with authorities.
We heard series of bang, 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 bang. It was like war over that side. And then a little later on, there were a series of high-powered bang, 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 bang over that area.
We had one deputy who was inside who was struck by one of the bullets in the shoulder.
Another deputy's head was grazed by a bullet. Another may have been saved by her uniform.
Another deputy was deflected by her equipment and she was not injured. So it hit her belt, deflected the shot.
A state highway patrol trooper suffered a shrapnel wound when a bullet went through his vehicle.
Oh my God, and it was really very, very scary.
McAllis died at the scene of a gunshot, but it wasn't clear if the deputies killed him or if he took his own life.
There is a new court battle over a deadly defect in some General Motors cars. A class action lawsuit was filed yesterday against GM in federal court in New York on behalf of 658 people who were injured or killed in crashes allegedly caused by faulty ignition switches. GM eventually recalled more than 2.5 million vehicles. We wondered how many have actually been fixed. Here's Jeff Pegues.
Someone described her as a rock star?
Jerry and Jay Goss say their 27-year-old daughter, Laura, was killed March 18th while driving a Saturn Ion with a defective ignition switch.
Have a safe trip back to Lexington. Love, Dad. That was one of the emails that you sent.
That's what parents are supposed to do, is protect your children. And they made it impossible for me to protect her.
So far, less than a quarter of the nearly 2.6 million vehicles recalled have been fixed. Most remain on the roads with the faulty ignition switch that GM says led to the deaths of 13 people. Clarence Ditlow is with the Center for Auto Safety.
You don't believe they have the parts? No, I don't. And if you don't have an adequate stock at every dealership in America, you're not going to get this recall done.
We called more than 30 GM dealerships across the country and were told parts are being ordered on an individual basis. One dealership said it would take 2 to 3 months for the part to arrive. But a GM spokesman says there are more parts than they have demand, and we're dealing with customers who may not be paying attention. Jerry and Jay Goss are concerned further delays could be deadly, not only for GM vehicle owners, but others on the roads as well.
They need to understand that that car in the other lane coming at them could be a GM recalled car and is literally a Scud missile headed right for them.
Federal regulators have the authority to intervene if there are delays in a recall process where there is the risk of serious injury or death.
At least 5 people have reportedly been killed and more than 20 wounded in one Ukrainian city alone. That's as the army continues its artillery attacks in the east.
Проезжать в шахте, инвалидность заработал. А моим детям уничтожили дом. Человека, инвалида убили. За что? Он всю жизнь инвалидность заработал. За что?
Соседа сколько она убила?
Убила, да?
Это плохо. Еще сепаратистов вычет мирном населении.
Потому что умирают мирные жители, а в основном умирают дети. Умирают дети, а это страшно.
The heaviest strike fell on the city of Gorlovka. That witnessed a 24-hour-long attack. Several apartment blocks, a school and a kindergarten were destroyed. On Monday, 17 people were killed there, including 3 children. In neighbouring Lugansk, artillery hit a retirement home, killing 5. People have been trying to hide or flee from the fighting on a daily basis. 5 artillery shells fired from Ukraine have reportedly exploded next to a Russian checkpoint on the border. Russian territory has repeatedly come under fire, and now a group of international observers has arrived at the border to inspect the situation there. Roman Kosarev visited a village that lies just across the river from Ukraine, and he asked locals what it's like to live next to a combat zone.
These people aren't at war with anyone, and yet it's their homes that are being shelled. The residents of this Russian village say artillery and gunfire usually start when it gets dark, forcing them to flee their homes for safety. The ongoing conflict in nearby Ukraine has now moved into their own backyard. The residents here are able to see the fighters of the National Guard without any special equipment. This particular house is located right on the Russia-Ukraine border, right beyond that river.
Our things are always packed. Unpacking is now useless. Bullets are flying right into our yards.
Locals have a chance to find shelter elsewhere in the region, far from the area of combat. But not everyone can just up and leave. Olga is a nurse at a psychiatric hospital and says it's hard to comfort her patients while the area gets shelled.
The patients are scared. It's hard to explain it all to mentally ill people. We tell them it's thunder. They hide under blankets and dive under the beds.
It's hard for children as well to understand why their homes are being targeted. But they already know what to do when hearing the sound of a rocket or gunfire.
We went to the town to hide, to escape from here. There are huge bomb attacks here.
I'm very scared, especially at night. The window panes are shaking and I'm crying.
These youngsters seem to take the threat of shelling quite bravely, but that's not the case in all the families.
My daughter is so scared. She doesn't even leave the house. She cries, and I even don't know how to help her.
Russian border crossings with Ukraine and nearby villages have been shelled numerous times over the last month. 1 civilian had been killed and several houses destroyed as these people are dragged into someone else's battle.
The fight of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip gets more desperate under Israeli fire. The defenseless people of the besieged enclave lash out at Arab countries for their silence on Israel's atrocities.
متحمين في الله متحمين في مين في العنوة متحمين في أنا يتخلف عني يطلعوا من الجامعين يروحوا يضربوهم مش حرام عليهم قتلوا يجي 50 واحد حسبنا بالله عليهم اليهود حسبنا بالله عليهم حسبنا بالله عليهم على العرب اللي ما شايفينا يسووا فينا يرحمونا بحياة يا معلم هيك
150 person pray 5 times a day, and where we want to go to now? Is this right for Mr. Netanyahu? I don't know what happened. I was in the second war at 1949, and I saw the war between the English and the German. It wasn't like this war. It wasn't like this war. This is not war. This is not war. What he do it.
اللي صارت الدبه وانا نايم انا واخوي ونسيبه فوق. صارت الدبه نزلنا لقينا واحنا فوق طلعت غرب هواء الغباب والخبط الدنيا مسكره دخان. والله انا وانا فوق وبقول اللي معاي والله بتقول له الديوان رماد. فعلا نزلنا لقينا الديوان رماد هيلع اللي في قلبه.
Unfortunately, we don't expect the security situation to improve enough over the next few days to make this possible. This makes it less likely that we will reach the crash site in the immediately short future. There is still too much fighting in the area and preventing safe passage for our people. Today, I have also had consultations with the Malaysian authorities with the aim of integrating Malaysian experts and police officers into a mission. Tomorrow, 68 Malaysian police officers will arrive in Kiev and will travel to Kharkov. We gaan opnieuw samen met de OVSE een poging doen om met ons.
Former NSA contractor Edward Snowden's one-year visa to Russia expires today. According to Russian law and regulations, Snowden has 4 methods of extending his stay in Russia: applying for refugee status, temporary asylum, political asylum, or a temporary residential permit. Analysts say it won't be difficult for him to continue staying in Russia if he chooses. His lawyer says Snowden has started the process of extending his visa. Last year, Snowden revealed broad government programs run by the U.S. National Security Agency that gathered information from the emails, phone calls, and internet usage by hundreds of millions of Americans. Snowden fled to Russia and spent more than a month living in a neutral transit zone in a Moscow airport before being granted temporary asylum, despite protests from the U.S. government.